A teenage boy rushed life-saving insulin to his sister, only to be blocked by a smug HOA enforcer who seized the medicine. Vice President Norman Grady thought neighborhood rules mattered more than a child's life, but Tyler's firefighter father and a county deputy had other plans that turned the tables. Just wait until you see how justice finally prevailed in this unforgettable showdown. It was one of those Florida afternoons that seemed to press the air against your skin, hot, heavy, and impossible to escape. The sun blazed down on the shimmering asphalt of Maplewood Estates, an upscale gated community where the lawns were flawless, and the rules were enforced with military precision. 15-year-old Tyler Brooks barely noticed the heat. His heart pounded harder than his feet on the bike pedals. Slung over one shoulder was a small insulated pouch, inside 2 fresh vials of insulin. Just 15 minutes earlier, Tyler's phone had buzzed with a text from his older sister Emily. "Ty, pen's not working. Dizzy. Please hurry." Emily, 19, had type 1 diabetes. The rolling blackouts triggered by the ongoing heat wave had killed her last remaining insulin pen. Now, she was alone at her best friend's house on the far side of the neighborhood, getting weaker by the minute. Their father, Jason Brooks, a career firefighter, was 30 miles away, stuck on a shift he couldn't leave. The nearest pharmacy was even farther. But Tyler didn't hesitate. He'd grabbed the pouch, thrown on his helmet, and pedaled as fast as his legs could carry him. He knew time was everything, but he didn't know the HOA had other plans. As he cut through a shaded side lane of Maplewood Estates, trying to shave precious seconds off his route, an SUV lurched from a side street and skidded to a stop in front of him. Tyler squeezed the brakes, heart jumping. The SUV door swung open with a metallic clang. A heavy-set man in a crisp polo shirt and mirrored sunglasses stepped out. The magnetic sign on the SUV's door read, HOA Compliance Patrol. Tyler's stomach dropped. He'd heard stories about them, self-styled enforcers who took HOA rules way too far. "Where do you think you're going, kid?" the man barked. It was Norman Grady, the HOA's vice president, a man infamous for treating minor infractions like federal crimes. I'm trying to get through," Tyler stammered, eyes darting past him. "My sister needs this, please." But before he could finish, Norman lunged forward and ripped the pouch from Tyler's grip. "This is private property," he snapped. "You're trespassing." Tyler's throat tightened. "Please, my sister needs this insulin right now. She's sick. She could—" Norman cut him off with a sneer. "Maybe next time your family should follow the rules and not send kids scurrying across my neighborhood." His voice dripped with smug authority, as if denying emergency medication was somehow an act of civic duty. Then, without a flicker of concern, Norman raised his radio to his mouth. "Code 4, non-resident minor on private property. Need backup to detain." "Detain." The word rang in Tyler's ears. Norman casually planted himself between Tyler and the bike, holding the pouch like a trophy. Tyler's breath came in shallow gasps. Emily was waiting. Every minute mattered. But here he stood, blocked by a man who cared more about rules than a life. And across town, Jason Brooks's phone buzzed with a message that would ignite a storm. "Dad, HOA stopped me. They took the insulin. I can't get through." Word traveled fast. When Jason Brooks finally answered the frantic call from his son, it was all he could do to keep his voice steady. "Dad?" Tyler's voice cracked through the speaker. "They stopped me. I can't get through. They took the insulin. Emily needs it. Dad, please." Jason's heart dropped. His training as a firefighter and paramedic had drilled one lesson into him above all others. Seconds matter, especially in diabetic emergencies, especially in this heat. He didn't hesitate. Within 60 seconds, Jason was in his department-issued truck, siren wailing as he tore out of the station. Protocol be damned. Along the way, he called one man who would understand the urgency, without question. Dan Mercer, his brother-in-law, a seasoned deputy with the county sheriff's office. Jason barely got the words out. "HOA blocked my son, took emergency meds. My daughter's crashing." Dan didn't ask for details. "On my way." When they arrived at the manicured gates of Maplewood Estates, Jason's truck and Dan's cruiser blazed through. Jason could already feel his blood pressure spiking, not from the speed, but from what he might find. And the scene that met them stole the breath from his lungs. In the center of the main cul-de-sac stood a small, terrified figure. Tyler. His bike lay tipped over on the pavement. Around him, 3 HOA Compliance Patrol members in fluorescent vests formed a loose ring, blocking any path of escape. At the front stood Norman Grady, smug and unyielding, one hand on his hip, the other holding the small, insulated pouch, as if it were evidence in a crime scene. Jason barely stopped the truck before he was out the door. "Tyler, are you hurt?" he shouted. Tyler shook his head, tears streaking his face. "Dad, they won't let me go. They took the insulin. Emily?" His voice broke. Jason turned, eyes narrowing, on Grady. "Give me the pouch, now." Grady's lips curled into a smirk. "We'll be filing formal charges. Trespassing and unauthorized delivery on private property. HOA bylaws are very clear." Jason's fists balled at his sides. His voice, when it came, was low and shaking with barely restrained fury. "That package contains life-saving medication. You are actively obstructing medical aid. That is a federal crime." Grady didn't flinch. "Our bylaws trump your opinions." The words dripped with a smug confidence that only deepened the knot in Jason's chest. Dan stepped forward, badge visible, tone ice cold. "You're detaining a minor and interfering with an active medical emergency. That makes this a criminal matter, one you will not walk away from easily." But Grady barely seemed to care. To him, this wasn't about a child in distress. It was about power. And at that moment, he believed the HOA's rules made him untouchable. Jason's pulse roared in his ears. Emily's blood sugar could be plummeting by the second. They were wasting precious time, and one man's ego now stood between her and survival. And Jason Brooks, a man who had pulled people from burning buildings and resuscitated drowning victims, had never felt such cold, righteous hatred as he did staring into the eyes of Norman Grady. Jason Brooks had spent 2 decades running into burning buildings. He knew what an emergency looked like. And this was one of the worst kinds, an emergency blocked by arrogance. He glanced at Tyler, pale, shaking, and then at the insulated pouch still gripped in Norman Grady's hand. Enough. In one smooth motion, Jason turned to Dan. His voice was low, steady, final. "Arrest them." Dan Mercer had waited for that moment. He stepped forward without hesitation, voice loud enough for everyone on the cul-de-sac to hear. "Under Florida statutes 784.05 and 843.06, you are unlawfully detaining a minor and interfering with emergency medical assistance." Norman's smug expression shattered. "You can't. This is HOA property," he sputtered. Dan didn't blink. With practiced efficiency, he twisted Norman's arms behind his back and secured the cuffs. Around them, the fluorescent-vested patrol members backed away fast, their self-appointed authority crumbling under real law enforcement. Jason snatched the pouch from the patrol car hood where it had been tossed moments earlier. He thrust it into Tyler's trembling hands. "Go, now." Paramedics arrived seconds later, lights flashing down the tree-lined street. They rushed Tyler and the insulin to the waiting ambulance where Emily was already on oxygen, pale and barely conscious. Inside the rig, every second counted. The paramedics worked quickly, injecting the fresh insulin, monitoring vitals. Jason stood outside, fists still clenched, jaw tight, every muscle in his body locked in helpless rage. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, one paramedic gave him a nod through the window. She was stabilizing. Relief mixed with fury. Jason looked back at the scene. Grady, sitting in the cruiser, defeated. The HOA patrol dispersed. But for Jason, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next day, Jason began his second fight. He filed a formal complaint with the state attorney general's office. He documented everything. Tyler's texts, eyewitness accounts, body cam footage from Dan's cruiser. His fire department union, furious that one of their own had faced such reckless obstruction, rallied behind him. Within 48 hours, local news picked up the story. Teen blocked by HOA while delivering emergency insulin. Outrage spread like wildfire. Social media exploded. Parents, medical professionals, and advocates for the disabled flooded comment sections demanding justice. What had started as one man's ego-driven power trip had become a public scandal. And then came the civil lawsuit. Filed swiftly and decisively, it listed multiple charges: false imprisonment, reckless endangerment, violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, each count carrying serious legal weight. Norman Grady, once the iron-fisted enforcer of Maplewood Estates, now faced not only public disgrace, but the very real possibility of losing everything he'd built his shallow authority upon. And Jason Brooks made one quiet vow that day, standing beside his recovering daughter. "We will see this through. No one will ever block life-saving care again. Not here." The courtroom was packed. Rows of local residents, reporters, and concerned citizens filled every available seat. The story of the HOA that blocked a child delivering life-saving insulin had captured the community's attention, and no one wanted to miss the final chapter. At the front sat the Brooks family. Jason, with a steady gaze. Tyler, with nervous hands folded in his lap. Emily, stronger now, her hand resting lightly on her brother's shoulder. Across the aisle, Norman Grady sat stiff and pale, flanked by his attorney and two silent members of the HOA board, faces drawn, shoulders heavy. The swagger and arrogance they had once displayed were long gone. The judge entered, and the room hushed. When the verdict was read, the words rang out with clarity. "In consideration of the evidence and the gravity of the offense, this court finds the defendants liable on all counts." A wave of relief rippled through the crowd. Norman Grady and the HOA board faced steep financial penalties, civil fines, personal liability for legal fees, and public censure recorded in the official HOA records. But the most powerful ruling came next. Effective immediately, the HOA's compliance patrol is permanently disbanded. Additionally, a standing restraining order is issued against Mr. Grady, prohibiting him from approaching minors or interfering with emergency medical transport in any capacity. There was no applause. Court decorum forbade it, but the atmosphere was electric. In that moment, justice had done what no neighborhood vote or protest ever could. It dismantled a petty regime built on ego and intimidation. But the story didn't end in the courtroom. Weeks later, the county medical board held a special public ceremony. They wanted to honor a young man whose quick thinking and courage had made the difference between tragedy and survival. Tyler stood nervously at the front of the stage, a small commendation plaque in his hands. Cameras flashed, officials spoke, but it was the next moment that brought the room to its feet. As Tyler stepped down, Emily rushed forward and wrapped him in a tight embrace. Her voice trembled as tears streamed down her face. "You saved my life." For Jason, watching his children in that embrace, the moment held more meaning than any verdict. They had faced arrogance, injustice, and fear, and they had overcome it. As the family left the hall, heads high and hearts full, they passed one last familiar face in the hallway. Norman Grady, shoulders slumped, eyes downcast, shuffled silently past the cameras, a man who once wielded petty power, now stripped of it. And as Jason placed a hand on Tyler's back, he knew one thing for certain. Some victories don't need applause. They speak for themselves.